Welcome to Season 4 of the Changing Earth podcast with Sara F. Hathaway, blending survival fiction and fact to bring you entertaining education that will help you dream, survive, and thrive. And now, here's your host, Sara F. Hathaway.
Hi, and welcome back to the Changing Earth podcast. This is episode number 135, Season 4, Episode 11. So we got some exciting things going on the Changing Earth podcast right now. It's an exciting time. We still have the audiobook giveaway going on, so subscribe over on YouTube, to my Facebook, to my newsletter, comment on that. I'm going to gather up all those people and throw them in the hat for the competition. And I got a bunch of those codes to give away, so there's still a really good chance to go over there and get entered in that contest and win. I'm really excited because I made a cover for my bonus chapters, and that's going to be included in my new edition of Day After Disaster. But everybody who's been with me for a long time, I'm going to make sure you get a copy of that. So we'll have that coming up on the podcast, how you can go ahead and get a hold of those bonus chapters once I get them back and get them organized into a PDF format. Also want to let you know that my podcast has officially been sponsored, and I'm super excited to take on this new adventure. So we will be including a couple of advertisements, starting out with like one or two, per episode. And it just helps me provide you with free content. So, it's exciting for me to have been sponsored and, to have that opportunity in front of me. So I hope you guys feel the same way I do. Bottom line is anything that I present on my show, I believe in. And I wouldn't do you wrong. I wouldn't steal you wrong. I'm all about providing you guys with education and content that is going to help you in your lives. So I get to okay every single thing that I present on my podcast. It's, totally in my wheelhouse. And so that's going to be exciting. And, it's just a new piece to the podcast that we'll be doing to help keep the show going around here. That's what it's all about. So last week in Battle for the South, Erica and Vince headed down to Houston to help out with this hurricane effort. This week, we're going to catch up with them there and see how it's going. And if this is any indication, Dr. Bones is back with us today, Dr. Joe Alton, and he is with us today to talk about abdominal injuries in a post-collapse society. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Always a good time to have Joe on. He's going to be with me down at the Self-Reliance Expo in Mesquite, Texas on March 23rd and 24th. So if you're interested in meeting Dr. Bones, getting to learn from him, he's going to be there on March 23rd and 24th. So that's really exciting. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into Battle for the South. Chapter 11. In the middle of the crowd, but completely alone, Erica stood. Her eyes were met with scared, sick, and hurt faces. The able-bodied volunteers hovered over them, but Erica knew there were not enough. Feeling an overwhelming sense of urgency, Erica jumped up onto the counter. "Let's get organized to move out, people," she commanded. Confused faces looked to her with questioning eyes. "If we're going to get safely back to the buses, we need a plan," she commanded, now that she had their attention. Adrenaline surged through her veins. She was scared to take on the responsibility for these people, but the urge to be a part of the solution overruled her logic. If no one else was going to take charge, she was. "What's the plan?" a burly-looking man in camouflage fatigues asked. His rifle was slung and he was supporting two limping individuals. "Let's get everyone who can move at all under their own capacity in a group over towards the left and get them moving out towards the buses with two volunteers," Erica yelled over the wind. "Anyone who needs to be carried, let's put over in the corner on the right." Erica jumped down to assist with the effort. "The name's Kyle," the man who had engaged her from the crowd announced as he approached her. "Nice to meet you, Kyle," Erica declared. "Want to give me a hand here?" He stared at her in awe for a moment. "Yeah, sure," he finally responded. Under the weight of the stretcher, they negotiated the shuffling people. "I can't believe I'm helping Erica Moore move a stretcher," he blurted out. But Erica couldn't understand him over the noise of the crowd. "What?" she wondered.
I can't believe I'm helping Erica Moore move a stretcher, he yelled in her face so she could hear. It's real great, Erica replied, staggering a little from the blast of noise in her face. Oh, sorry, Kyle responded, seeing her reaction to his overzealousness. Erica chuckled at the young man's actions. I'm flesh and blood, same as you, Kyle, Erica yelled back, brushing off the man's adoration. Ma'am, another volunteer approached Erica. We have all the folks who can move themselves assembled. Bobby and I are going to walk with them. Does that work for you, Miss Moore? Sounds good. See you guys in a bit, Erica responded. Erica couldn't take her eyes off the hallway and kept glancing that way, eager for Vince to return. Miss Moore, Kyle said, drawing her attention. I was talking with Darlene, and she says no way we can take all these people at once. I know, Erica retorted, looking back down the hallway. Then what are we going to do, he wondered. We'll take half now and come back for the other half. We'll tuck them up against those walls and shield them. It's all we can do, she directed. Yes, ma'am, he said without question. He turned and relayed the information to a lady Erica assumed was Darlene. Before she knew it, everyone was in motion, determining who would stay and who would go. Erica's eyes met the white of the empty hallway again. She sighed heavily, when suddenly Vince burst through the doorway from the stairs. Juan was slung over his shoulder. Erica sprinted down the hallway. She went to help bear the weight of the injured man, but hesitated. Juan's back was gashed diagonally through his waist. Oh my God, Vince, what happened? Erica asked in horror. A piece of sheet metal. I had to pull it out to move him, Vince huffed. Why didn't you put him on a stretcher? Erica wondered absent-mindedly, thrown off by all the blood. Couldn't find one, couldn't carry it alone, he responded, gasping for air. Kyle! Erica screamed down the hallway. His head appeared from around the corner. Bring a stretcher, Erica commanded. Kyle was down the hall in a flash, carrying a bright yellow plastic stretcher. He and Erica helped Vince carefully lower a passed-out Juan onto it. Kyle and Vince carried the stretcher to the lobby. Erica, Kyle and I will double-time it back to the buses and meet you there. I don't know how long Juan can hold out, Vince told her as he and Kyle trotted out the door. I love you. Be careful, she exclaimed. A few seconds later, Erica was headed out the door with another patient. The stretcher was being torn from her hands in the relentless wind. You okay? She questioned the lanky boy on the other end. I've got this, he responded confidently above the ripping wind. Rain flew at them from every direction and stung Erica's eyes as she tried to look up the street to see Vince. Watch out, she yelled as a piece of wood came flying at their group. One of the volunteers had fashioned himself a nice shield from a piece of metal rolling table, and he protected the group with a well-placed block. They continued on, slowly, the wind pressing them and the rain pelting them. Finally, they saw the buses. To Erica's relief, people ran out to help. The eye of the storm was heading their way, and it was time to go. The city had been surrounded by volunteers ready to help, and all that could be done was. The city had been cut in half by the floodwaters after the Great Quake and had stood for 12 long years after that, thanks to Texas ingenuity. But this storm would be the last straw. There was no holding back the water now. What about the people we left behind? Erica queried, but no one had an answer. Who's in charge here? Erica wondered. Ted Ferguson is Juan's boss, and he runs the southern region, Kyle told her. Where is he? Erica was infuriated. Kyle pointed towards the lead bus, and Erica stormed off. Excuse me, miss, a man was saying to her as she approached the bus. Where is Ted Ferguson? Erica demanded loudly. He's in the bus, but maybe I can help you, the man said calmly, placing himself between her and the bus. You can, she admitted loudly. You can come back with me into the city to get the people we had to leave behind at the hospital. Hold on just a second, he started to say, but was interrupted as a short, gray-haired man stepped into the doorway of the bus. We left people behind? The man questioned, concerned. Yes, at the hospital, Erica explained. Erica could tell from the relief in his eyes that he had already made the decision to leave those people there. Oh, yes, the ones at the hospital, he responded. We can't just leave them there, Erica declared. The storm's too close, darling. We can't risk able-bodied people for them. Look what happened to Juan already, Ted retorted. Oh, no, he did not just call me darling, Erica thought. I'll do it, Erica blurted out. By yourself? I don't think so, Ted said, turning to leave the doorway. If I can get the 20 volunteers I need, will you leave a bus for us? Erica asked before he left. He studied her for a moment and declared, Darlin', if you can get the volunteers to go with you, I'll leave the bus. What the hell? It's still a free state, right? Erica sprinted back to the group she had left. They had loaded all the stretchers and were starting to disband. Vince watched her coming back like she had the strength of 1,000 men with her. He was curious what her next move would be. Hold on a second, she yelled to the volunteers. We can't leave now. We can't leave those people behind. A crowd had started to form around her now. Vince was amused. He loved his little powerhouse. We've all left people behind before, and each time it breaks your heart more and more. We are free people, free to determine our own paths, free to choose to do the right thing or the wrong thing. And the right thing is to go save those people. Erica's voice echoed through the rain. Vince saw the man that must be in charge looking on from the back of his bus. The crowd cheered for her, and in the end, she had double the number of volunteers she needed, and the use of 2 buses to get everyone back safely. They headed back into the storm as the water increased in the streets.
Unable to leave people behind, Erica rallies volunteers to go back to the hospital to save these people. While they were there, Juan received one heck of an injury. And here to talk about abdominal injuries in a post-SHTF world is Dr. Joe Alton. But before I introduce Joe, today I want to tell you about a video that was just released by the man who notoriously predicted Trump's victory. He was one of the few who predicted Trump would win the presidential election, and he was even mocked on live TV for saying Hillary would lose. He's also notorious for predicting other major events, such as the financial fiasco in 2008. I'm talking about Jim Rickards. He's the nation's most vocal and intelligent proponent of the gold standard. Not to mention, he's a national security advisor, Pentagon insider, and financial warfare expert. Well, now he's making another shocking Trump prediction, one that he anticipates the fake news media will not cover. If you want to hear about this shocking prediction, go to www.author.sarahfhathaway.com/newsletter. This shocking prediction could impact your life and the lives of millions of Americans. Go to www.author.sarahfhathaway.com/newsletter and click on the show notes for this week's podcast. That's www.author.sarahfhathaway.com/newsletter. Let me tell you about Dr. Joe Alton now. Dr. Joe Alton has been featured on seasons 2, 3, and 4. He is the co-author of the Survival Medicine Handbook. Dr. Joe Alton, MD, aka Dr. Bones, is an MD and fellow of the American College of Surgeons and the American College of OBGYN. Amy Alton, ARNP, aka Nurse Amy, is an advanced registered nurse practitioner. Together, they're the authors of the #1 bestseller in survival skills and safety first aid, the Survival Medicine Handbook. Well-known speakers, podcasters, and YouTubers, as well as contributors to leading survival homesteading magazines. You will find over 700 posts on medical preparedness on their website. Their mission is to put a medically prepared person in every family for disaster situations. You can find Dr. Joe Alton at www.doomandbloom.net. That's www.doomandbloom.net. Let's go ahead and welcome Joe to the show. Today I am back with our resident doctor on the show, Dr. Joe Alton. Thank you very much, Dr. Alton, for being on the show. I really appreciate your time.
It's an honor to be here, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
I know it's a busy schedule with all the work you got going on. So why don't you go ahead and update us on what is going on with Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy over at doomandbloom.net.
Well, we're pleased to announce that our book, the 3rd edition of our book, the 700-page Survival Medicine Handbook, The Essential Guide for When Medical Help is Not on the Way, that's its title, has won the 2017 Book Excellence Award in the medical category, and so that is a pretty always a good thing to be able to say you have an award-winning book out there. So we've been very happy. We've sold over 100,000 copies of the book, and we are just blessed by the support of your listeners and so many others that we've had the honor to teach over the years about dealing with medical issues when the ambulance is not just around the corner. And indeed, that happens not too often. But these days, you never know when a disaster might hit you. And if that's the case, you know that emergency services, all the great people that help us, they might wind up not really being available. They might be overwhelmed by mass casualties and things like that. So hopefully this book is going to help people become more medically prepared. If I can put a medically prepared person in every family, then I will have achieved my goal. I can say mission accomplished. Still a long way from that, though. And so we continue to put out videos on our YouTube channel, Dr. Bones Nurse Amy. That's Dr. Bones Nurse Amy channel. And our Facebook is, so we have a survival medicine group now, about 6,000 strong. And you get a lot of great information on there. And we are traveling the country. We maybe in Mesquite, Texas, with you at the Self-Reliance Expo. We're going to be doing a lot of individual classes. We've started doing 8-hour classes in various locations. Had one in Jacksonville recently, one in Knoxville, Tennessee, and these have been really well received. Teach a lot of stuff.
Well, congratulations on your award. What an honor to receive that. It's really nice when all the hard work that you put in is paying off a little bit, right? And
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a great thing, and I know you have some great books coming that have come out too, and we're certainly fans of your writing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I agree the same. I love the concept of having, that actual physical manual on hand. Even for folks like me, I live an hour and a half away from any type of hospital, things like that. If we have a medical emergency, it's best to know what to do first before you even call on a responder or anything like that. So, because it takes time, it's going to take time to get from point A to point B. So it's a great mission that you guys are on, and just kudos. And I hope to see you down in Texas at the Self-Reliance Expo.
Sounds good.
So today we are talking abdominal injuries, and there's a lot of different variables that can go along with this topic. In my book, my character Juan ends up with a piece of sheet metal wedged into his side, and it's done some severe additional abdominal trauma. So if somebody sustains this type of injury, what can we do to save them? Is there any way? Because I know that abdominal punctures can be big problems.
Oh boy, I'll tell you that abdominal injuries are one of the most complex issues that you will have to face in your role as medic in any off-grid setting. And there are so many different organs that you have. There are so many different regions in the abdomen that can be affected. It just depends on, of course, what the damaging projectile is. In your case, it's sheet metal. Of course, in normal life and normal times, it's most likely blunt trauma from an automobile accident. 75% of blunt abdominal injuries occur as a result of a motor vehicle crash. And of course, then there's penetrating injuries, and those are not usually due to sheet metal, but are usually due to, knife and gunshot wounds. And all of these are very complex because you have a number of different organs in your abdomen, and I'll tell you that any one of them can cause major issues. You have solid organs like the liver and I forget what side was the injury
Left
on?
side.
On the left side. And on the left side, if you wind up with sheet metal, for example, in your flank, there's very likely you'll have damage to the kidney. You can have damage to the spleen. Those are items that are in the left side. And of course, you have the large bowel that's descending on the left side. So you really have a lot of things that can cause problems. The solid organs like the spleen and the kidney, these things will have a tendency to bleed, and the hollow organs like the large intestine will have a tendency to spill out their contents into the abdominal cavity. When that happens, the bleeding may not be as impressive as with let's say, a ruptured spleen, but boy, there is almost a certainty that there's going to be some kind of infection going on there.
Yeah, because once your guts spill into your inside, you're looking at some major infection, and this could be a long, slow process, right? I mean, abdominal injuries, if you develop the infection, it can be a really long, drawn out way to die, basically.
It's very true. You know that hospitals during the Civil War were just filled with people with soldiers that wound up with injuries, gunshot wounds, and other shrapnel wounds that penetrated the abdomen, and it was a slow way to go because even if they weren't bleeding, if they didn't bleed heavily, which of course would have killed them early, over the course of time, unless you got in there and were able to close up the hole in those intestines, something not done very often back in that era, right. Well, it almost certainly meant that you would wind up having an infection. The infection would cause all sorts of irritation inside the abdomen. You'd swell up like a balloon, and you would die in a very unpretty way.
Yeah, that's what I've learned through the history. Watching that one, I'm like, oh my goodness, that is not something that I would want to occur. Like, just put a bullet in my head way before that happens, please, right?
Absolutely. Luckily, these days we have a lot of high technology and a pretty high index of suspicion with regards to abdominal injuries. You have to always be very, very suspicious that there's a lot going on whenever you have somebody that has been injured in, let's say, even a motor vehicle crash or any kind of real major trauma, because there's always going to be something going on, and it may not show itself right away. That's the thing with abdominal injuries. It may take a while for swelling to occur, for the abdomen become rigid, accumulate blood, for example, and you really have to worry. Even in motor vehicle crashes, you may not see that very, very, very quickly. Now, if I will give you one little tidbit here, in a motor vehicle crash, if somebody has had enough damage so that there are marks from the seatbelt still on, that is a big indicator that there's probably some major internal damage. When the seatbelt is tugged on enough from that rapid deceleration that it leaves marks on the outside of the body, then that is a really good indicator that there's going to be something going on inside as well. And even more with kids that wind up in that situation, because seatbelts really aren't made for kids. And the kid's abdomen is not as solid. The support in the abdomen, the abdominal muscles and things like that, aren't quite as solid. And so what happens is these kids wind up getting abdominal injuries much more often.
Yeah, they don't have the stomach muscles and things developed yet that give them that extra protection.
Exactly right. Also, I want to say one other thing about kids and blunt trauma. You have a kid that has blunt trauma to the abdomen. That's not related to a motor vehicle crash. I would be very or maybe a fall from a bicycle. I would be very concerned even about abuse, because that is something. That's something that you see in a lot of situations. It's very hidden, something that you will not find in your history, because the child is afraid to tell, and certainly those abusers will not be forthcoming with regards to that information.
Right. It's you can't see the physical bruising as much as you can if it's on the face or something like that.
Exactly.
That makes sense. So what type of injuries, so if you did get hit, what are some of the organs that what are the likelihood that we're going to be able to go in and close up somebody's bowel in a SHTF situation when we're not trained doctors that do this all the time?
Well, I think that you probably can expect Civil War era death rates from abdominal injuries. Those range from 60 to 70%. And so that's the big problem, is that even if you enter the abdomen, you decide to, take the scalpel and explore and see what's going on in there. What happens is it's so hard to maintain a sterile environment that it's very likely that you could introduce infection even when there's not infection there. And of course, in any penetrating trauma, there's probably already excrement and all sorts of stuff floating around free in the belly already.
Yeah.
So you really have a problem. But the issue is, though, that with bleeding situations, let's say a ruptured liver, a ruptured spleen, things like that, wow, you really have a lot. You really have to intervene in some way. Otherwise, you wind up having somebody that's going to die anyhow. Now, there are circumstances in which you can actually identify whether somebody's bleeding internally, and that is not high tech. And one of them would be having just a regular old IV catheter and some tubing and a syringe. And if you can what you do is you puncture the abdominal cavity, you go into the abdominal cavity with the needle, and you suction out whatever fluid might be there. If what comes out is bright red blood, then you've got an arterial bleed going on in the belly. The thing with the belly, you have 4 regions in the belly, and the true abdomen is basically a open space that is just surrounded by what we call peritoneum. That's your abdominal lining.
Right.
And that hold a great deal of blood. I remember earlier in my career, when I was doing mostly obstetrics and gynecology, I had people that had pregnancies that didn't implant in the right place. They didn't implant in the womb. They would implant in the tube instead. And what would happen is pregnancy would hit maybe about 2 months, and then it would rupture through the tube, and oftentimes there would be a lot of bleeding. And from a tiny little bleed, there are times that I would go into the belly and I would have to evacuate 2 liters of blood.
Wow.
So just a lot of stuff. I mean, these people can die from something as simple as that. So this is
because all that blood can create pressure on the other organs.
Oh, it does, and after a period of time, you can't help but go into shock. And so I've seen people that were originally, before they called me in, they were originally sent home as having a case of gastroenteritis, and came back. These were in the old days before, I guess, they did pregnancy tests on them right away. Well, I mean, honestly, any female who has abdominal pain, you should always do a pregnancy test first. So that was then. If we're talking about what hits the fan settings, now you have some specific issues that you have to do. Now, first you have to do a full examination. The examination of the belly for someone who may have trauma involves 4 aspects, and one of them is inspection, what we call inspection. That basically is take a look at the belly. You basically expose the person from the nipple down to the pubic bone, and you just take a look. Is the belly distended? Is somebody who's normally skinny now have a beer belly? If that's the case, then you should be worried there's something going on. The next is auscultation, where we're listening with a stethoscope. And if you listen with a stethoscope in normal bellies, you're going to hear some noise. You're going to hear the gas and all that stuff passing through the intestines. Now, when those intestines get damaged, they stop working. And when they stop working, you no longer hear that sound. So that's another thing that would be useful to do. Another thing you can do is something called percussion. You take your hand, you place it lightly on the belly, and then you tap the top knuckle of your middle finger with your other hand, with your other middle finger, and that will cause a lot of pain in somebody who's got some damage inside. And of course, the most important thing is to palpate it, or basically place your hands on there and feel around. And each area, each quadrant of the belly, if you divide the belly into 4 separate quadrants, each one will elicit pain for specific issues. For example, you would have pain if you had a gallbladder attack. You would have pain in the upper right area. If you had a ruptured liver, you would have pain in the upper right. If you ruptured your spleen, it would be pain in the upper left side. If you had an appendicitis, it would be pain in the lower right side. And on the lower left, it could be, let's say, a ruptured ovarian cyst, let's say, could be one of those things, or it could be damage to the large intestine as it goes down and becomes the rectum. So a lot of different things. You have to really do an organized evaluation. And the most important thing is to do it more than once and follow the progress. Because what happens is that as blood accumulates in the belly, it may not be so noticeable right after the event, but if blood is accumulating, it'll be much more noticeable with exams over time. So always do multiple times. As a matter of fact, you only identify the injury about 65% of the time on your first go-round. And so you wind up missing a lot if you don't continue to monitor that person and really continue to examine them using the different methods that I mentioned.
Okay. So there is a lot that can go wrong. It seems obviously there's probably more so that can go wrong on the female side than there is on the male side. So, how do you kind of tell that apart? Like, somebody could have been in a trauma but also have appendicitis. I mean, how would we know in a situation like that? It's just your best guess?
Well, no, you ask a little bit about the history of how things are timed. Somebody with appendicitis oftentimes starts off by having some pain in the belly button region, and then it travels down to that right upper quadrant. There's a specific point where you have pain with appendicitis that's called McBurney's point, and that's exactly 1/3 of the way from the pubic bone that you feel the pubic bone on that side, and not the pubic bone, the pelvic bone, the crest that's on the left lower side. So if you looked at it, if you know what a pelvic bone looks like,
right?
There's a crest on top, and that top is the bottom, is where you start from. Go 1/3 of the way from there to the belly button. You press there, and especially if you press and then release, and the pain is worse when you release, that's called rebound tenderness. That's a sign of appendicitis. Now, of course, if somebody has appendicitis and also got shot, well, that person's having a really bad day.
Right, exactly.
Basically, you have to, the important thing is you're right. You shouldn't ignore, just because there's one thing going on, don't ignore other issues. As a matter of fact, if there's a gunshot wound in the belly, look all around that person because they may have gunshot wounds elsewhere. And remember that with ballistic trauma, there is, of course, the cavity that the bullet makes as it goes through. But there's also a shock wave that occurs, that burst of kinetic energy when the bullet strikes a solid object like your belly, and it forms this shock wave that causes damage. We call that temporary cavitation because it doesn't leave a hole that the size of the shock wave. There's only the small hole from the bullet, but the shock wave can damage. In other words, if I shot you just below your liver, you could bleed from your liver just from the shock wave that occurred from the bullet passing through, even if the bullet didn't hit your liver.
Yeah, that makes sense because it can be pretty radical to have that wave depending on the size of the bullet.
Yeah, exactly right. And of course, there are other factors like the hollow points that deform to form a mushroom, and that's meant to make the cavity bigger as it goes through, and also to it has a tendency to slow it down a little bit so that it stays in there, but it forms an incredible amount of damage. There's a fragmentation from all the a lot of bullets will fragment, or if they strike a bone. Let's say if I shot you in the thigh bone, then you would wind up having a lot of different fragments of your thigh bone actually forming their own cavities, forming their own channels as they
do damage, ripping through there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of issues with regards to that, and you have a number of different. I want to talk about very quickly the four regions of the abdomen. There are four quadrants to the belly when you examine people, but there are different places that you have in the abdomen that uh, look different. Now, you have part of your abdomen is actually below your rib cage and below the lower ribs, and that will have your diaphragm, most of your liver, your spleen, and your stomach are all in these areas. You've got the pelvic abdomen where you have the female organs, as you mentioned, but you also have some small intestine. You have the rectum there, the bladder. These things can get damaged. You might see that as, let's say, if somebody's bleeding when they urinate, you might suspect then that there's obviously been some trauma to the bladder.
Can you survive that? Like, I mean, is that survivable?
You would develop something called a uroma, which is basically accumulation of urine in your abdomen. Sometimes, because the risks of death are pretty much the percentages that I gave you earlier.
Right.
But there are people that survive this, and the way they survive this is either by pressure from, let's say, the guts pressing on whatever hole was made in the bladder, and scarring over that over time. If it turns out there's not arterial bleeding, or if your bleeding stops before your clotting factors give out, then some people will develop basically a walled off area that contains the offending fluid or the offending material. And that indeed can happen. There are some people who survive a ruptured appendix, for example, but of course there are many more people that die as a result of the infection and inflammation.
Okay.
And so you have that. You have the true abdomen, which is the part that's actually floating around free inside this lining that I call the peritoneum. And then you have the pelvic, the area that is behind the intestines and things like that. That's actually covered. That's in back of your lining, and it includes your aorta and your large vein that goes down there. It's called the vena cava, and it includes a number of other organs. For example, your kidneys aren't part of the they don't float free in your abdomen. They're in a position right behind the abdominal lining. So it's all an anatomy lesson here. I know it might be a little much for a lot of people, but listen, if you're going to be the medically responsible person in times of trouble, you better know a little anatomy, right?
Yes, absolutely. You better know what's in there and where it's at. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, because there's so many just classic problems we can have. For example, I had my gallbladder removed because it wasn't functioning properly. This is not something that they can do, that we'd be able to do in an SHTF situation or even know what's going on.
Yeah, it's true. That would be basically a cause of significant discomfort in people. In some cases, it can cause a blockage. The gallbladder can actually be blocked. There's a little canal that goes from the gallbladder into the GI tract to help these digestive enzymes sort of get in there and work their magic. And a gallbladder it's a situation where a lot of people may have, let's say, gallstones, but not ever know it until they actually get an attack. And if they get an attack, is that what happened to you?
No, mine actually wasn't pumping enough. So when I would eat, it would fill up. I didn't have any stones in there, but it would fill up, and then it wouldn't pump itself out. So when I'd eat again, it would just fill up and keep filling up with the bile and filling up, and it was like poisoning me, basically.
Right, exactly. And some of these people develop things like jaundice. They may become yellow. There are a lot of things like that can happen, and it can be very dangerous if not treated. And so some of these, you have to realize that there are hard realities when it comes to survival, and especially that not just headaches for the medics, but heartaches, because there are things that right now would be relatively easy. I could probably whip out a gallbladder, in no time through very small incisions, but that is something that will go the way of the dinosaur if something ever takes us off the grid and we wind up with an EMP, and you don't have power at all. These are going to be much more complex surgeries involving much bigger incisions and much higher complications.
Yeah, I've seen the old incisions that they used to do, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that I could have mine taken out like nowadays, because it was really small, no big deal. But like you said before too, even just going in there to do that, you introduce the risk of infection so much more. And like even with my incisions, so I was outside after I was healing, and it was a really hot day, so I was just in my sports bra out brushing the horse. Well, I got dirt into that incision, and it started developing an infection. So even things like that are going to be really high risk when we're living in these dirty environments.
Yeah, that's why I'm the guy who wrote that original article on fish antibiotics, and that's why I really feel that folks in the preparedness community, if you really believe that there's something that is possibly on the horizon that may take away access to modern medical care, I really think that you need to get some antibiotics as part of your medical supplies, and you have to put together a survival medicine cabinet, and you should read up on fish antibiotics. I have lots of free articles on the website at doomandbloom.net that tells you all about them and why I believe they're safe, and when I say safe, I mean safe to use in a survival setting. I mean, and when there's modern and standard medical care and modern medical professionals around, then of course you should seek them out. But I think that it's a good idea to have some of this stuff available, and I talk about all the different types and the ones that I want you to have, not only in the Survival Medicine Handbook, but also in a lot of my free articles over at doomandbloom.net.
Okay. So we're out in the field, our friend is injured or whatever. We go through the steps of trying to see what's wrong, depending on where they were hit, our knowledge of the organs and things behind that. What is like best case? Well, obviously best case scenario would be it didn't hit any organs, but what would be like, in your opinion, the most survivable injuries to an abdomen area?
Any injury that doesn't puncture the peritoneum, the abdominal lining, is something that's going to be able to be dealt with just like a, quote, flesh wound. Now, these are very rare in terms of, if it was a gunshot wound, it's very rare that unless you really have been doing a lot of sit-ups, that bullet is not going to pass through your abdominal lining. But if you wind up getting, those movie type gunshot wounds where they're shot in the belly, but they're shot like right on the very edge of the belly in their glove handle. Well, that one is going to probably be easier to survive than just about anything else. And just remember that you almost really can't get away with a stab wound from a deep stab wound, at least, or a gunshot wound without something going on in the belly. So that's really the dilemma for the survival medic, is that there's almost always something that has happened, and you may hope that your body may wall off some of these things, but if it hits a blood vessel, or if you wind up with a raging infection, well, you just have to understand the hard realities that come with being the medic in a survival setting.
Yeah, it's true. So if it's a blunt trauma, it would almost be better to be a puncture, because at least then you can see the evidence. But if it's a blunt trauma and you have that kind of bloating and stuff going on, what should you do at that point?
Well, if it's blunt trauma, you can have a good idea that that's happening by looking for a couple of signs. One of them is Cullen's sign, and Cullen's sign is the accumulation of bruising around the belly button. If you see that, then that's a sign that there's bleeding going on inside. And the other one is what's it called? Gray Turner sign, and that is significant bruising in the flank after blunt trauma, that oftentimes presages a bleed in the kidney and in the flank organs, maybe even the spleen. So when you see those things, then you know you may have a major issue. You either can, if it's blunt trauma, it's not penetrating. That's good because the likelihood of infection is obviously goes way down, but the likelihood of bleeding is still there. You either have to just observe these people. If it's clear that the bleeding is occurring, you might try applying some pressure, but usually in the abdomen that doesn't really help much, especially with blunt trauma. So you have to make a decision as to whether you would want to intervene surgically, and the way to make that decision, the way I would make that decision, at least at first, maybe in an off-grid setting, would be to do the tubing, needle, and syringe test, and that we call that peritoneal aspiration or peritoneal lavage is medical speak for that procedure.
Okay. Does just having that tube in there and so, because I've actually seen that on like some of the TV shows where it's a post-apocalyptic situation where they put a tube in to like remove well, they do it for the lung injury, of course, to help remove the pressure. But would that also work to just take some of the blood out of the abdomen and hope that it's just going to heal itself?
Well, blood is an irritant to the abdominal lining, so it would certainly make the person feel more comfortable if you were able to do that. But you'd have to remove, if somebody has a major bleed, remember we're talking about 2 liters of fluid, and it's going to be hard to find a syringe that's going to be that big, or you'd probably have to use it 100 times to get all that stuff out. Now, of course, if you have access to power, then it can be, there are suction machines that I know some preppers have put together, and they have solar generators and things like that, and that might work, and similar to how a chest tube works to get out. Chest tube gets air out so that the lung can inflate, and this would get blood out. Now, if the blood that's coming out is bright red, though, then that means there's something still going on that's actively bleeding, and eventually that person, unless the blood clotting factors can take over and stop the bleeding, well, that person is in big trouble.
What color would it be if it wasn't bright red, like a really deep red?
It would be blackish red.
Okay, it would be a blackish red. Okay. So we're either looking for that, or you're hoping for that blackish red.
Right. Well, no, you're hoping for clear fluid, or very little fluid or clear fluid, because that, there's not supposed to be any blood at all floating around in the belly. So if that's the case, that would be something that would be somewhat reassuring. There are still areas that might be bleeding that aren't in the abdomen proper, like the kidney, which is way back in the flank here, that could have bleeding. But this is one way that you can identify some of these issues.
Okay. If it was a real life, SHTF situation, and you've identified somebody who most likely has appendicitis, you might go for it because you're really trained at these things. But would you see if they'd survived, or would you try to remove it?
Well, it depends. I personally, unless the abdomen is absolutely rigid and really distended, you might, if you can get it early with a maybe antibiotic regimen of maybe doxycycline and metronidazole, fishazole, and a bird biotic, it's possible that it may cool off on its own.
Okay.
So now once it's ruptured, then that's going to be less likely. Still, the person might survive by scarring down that area. You never know. Sometimes that will happen, but usually they will do an appendectomy. And an appendectomy, I mean, you can go on YouTube and actually see appendectomies that are done under local or under very little anesthesia.
Okay, so it's worth a shot.
So it's. I think the first thing you should do, first off, always never wait until something gets really bad. That's your job as a medic. As you know, those have to be on the lookout for people that are having problems. If somebody's starting to have pain in their belly, then you need to take them aside, and they may say, no, I got to do this, I got to do that. Take them aside and check them out and make sure that you think that they're okay, and follow them, find out how they're doing the next day, things like that. Because the earlier you can you can catch these things, and I'm not talking just about abdominal things, injuries or abdominal conditions. I'm talking about just about anything.
Right.
Wound infections. If I was there when you were having your wound infection, I probably would have wanted to. If I was at your homestead, I'd be looking at that thing every day.
Right.
To see
if
what it
not
looks
a few times a day, right?
Right, and the second that thing starts looking red or warm or not quite right, then I would be putting you on something. And if you can do that, and keep these things clean, of course, wounds especially, well, you're going to be able to save some lives.
Other than antibiotics, is there any other things that you would suggest that we have prepared ahead of time to handle these types of situations? Because it seems to me like it's going to happen. People are going to be out in the field, just working and get hit by logs or whatever. You're going to take these types of injuries. So is there anything special that we can have ready to go ahead of time?
Well, it would be nice if you could accumulate IV fluids. Obviously, Ringer's lactate is the kind of IV fluid that you would want to use for this type of injury, but these things are prescription, and so although you can find them once in a while online, a lot of companies will try to sell this stuff for a period of time until the local medical board gets wind of it, and you might actually be able to find it. The problem with that is that these are very heavy. These things are heavy to carry, and so if you're on the move, this is not going to be really much of an option for you. And you have to accumulate enough of this stuff because sometimes people need, a few liters of this stuff a day to keep them going. And so, it's almost impossible to get the amount of material, in terms of IV fluids, to really make a difference, a true difference for the medic. And you'll find online, a lot of places selling these 250 milliliter bags of fluid. Well, I mean, if you've got somebody who's in shock, that isn't going to make a dent in it. Okay. And in that person's, if they're in what we call hemorrhagic or hypovolemic shock, in other words, their blood vessels don't have enough blood in them, for example, to keep up the blood pressure, then 250 cc's is not going to do a darn thing. You're going to need liters and liters of fluid to keep their blood pressure up.
Yeah, and like you said, if it hit that abdominal wall and that creates that much blood, you could need a lot of blood pressure back.
Well, as I tell people in our bleeding bleeding control classes, if it's an arterial bleed and it's significant enough artery, well, I mean, you may have 3 to 5 minutes to intervene to actually save that life. Otherwise, if you were shot in the femoral artery or you were stabbed in the femoral artery, well, you could be gone in as little as 3 to 5 minutes. That's not me. That's from the Committee on Tactical Combat Combat Casualty Care saying that.
Yeah, maybe that's why we're taught to shoot from the ground up. Hopefully you hit that along the way, right?
There you go, right.
Mm-hmm. So we should definitely have like a surgery, like a surgeon's kit, so we have a scalpel and the tubing and stuff like that on hand.
Well, you need to have a lot of medical supplies, and they are varied. If you are going to be responsible, I mean, in other words, if you're going to be responsible for a community as a medical person, you need to be able to function to deal with not only infectious disease. You need to have a good isolation room, a place that you put the sick people so they don't get away from common areas, so that the sick people are separated from the healthy people, while at the same time well ventilated and give the sick people the best chance for recovery. You need to know that. You need to have enough supplies to deal with orthopedic injuries. Those are going to be a big issue. You have to have enough supplies to deal with bleeds, and you need to have a procedure area. You need to have an area where you could perform a procedure, and these include what you would think would be mundane things, or are very important things like just an instrument tray. Just to have various instruments, and to have a table where you can actually put these things, so you're not putting them on the ground, and you're not
right.
Hey, give me that scalpel from the dirt there. You definitely need to. And I'm not saying that you're going to be able to put together a sterile environment. Let's be realistic. What we're looking for is a clean environment. In other words, that you have done a good faith effort to decrease the colony count in the area that you're going to be working on with this particular patient or victim. And so this is possible to do. Sterile isn't, but clean is.
Right, of course, like having, the sterile where you can, I've heard you can sterilize your instruments and stuff in a pressure cooker and things like that instead of the spinner deal.
Yes, and that a pressure cooker would be good. 15 psi for 30 minutes should do it. You can wrap it up, and you can wrap them up in newspaper if that's all you got.
And then what's your best thing to stock for just cleaning down an area, like your table and all that? Like just bleach, or do you have something better?
Bleach. Absolutely. Okay. Bleach, simplest thing. 1 part bleach to 9 parts water, and make sure that your area has no fabric on it. Every item that you have should be either on plastic or should be just a hard surface. Right. And if you do that, then bacteria love to colonize fabric. Things like your grandma's couch, things like that.
Right.
So you don't want your grandma's couch as your operating table.
Yeah, no, I imagine not. That could get really messy anyway, having it all soak in there. So, okay, yeah, so that's possible. Bleach in the liquid form, does it deteriorate more rapidly?
Yes, it's no good after about a year to 18 months. So you can consider getting pool shock, calcium, hypochlorite, and you just got to be real careful because you're making bleach from a very small amount. I mean, we have it here as part of our supplies here, and it's useful, of course, for sterilizing water. It's useful for making bleach to clean surfaces, and it's not an unreasonable thing to consider as part of your survival storage.
That's where I was going with it, because we have the chlorine tabs for the pool specifically, but you would rather stock the actual shocker. It's a better product. Well,
I have to look and see what I never actually looked at the tablets. So I'd have to look at what the ingredients of the tablets are. And the percentage of calcium hypochlorite. You'd like to go for close to 70%. Some of them are less than that though. So I would have to look at the ingredients.
At the specific one, yeah. Because when we just got a little doughboy pool, and I was like, if I buy too many of these tablets, are they going to go bad, kind of thing, to the guy who was selling me. And he's like, no, they stay, strong. They stay potent for a whole lot longer than any type of liquid chlorine. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. So maybe we could use it for that type of situation. So it all depends on the amount of hypochlorite in it.
Yeah, percentage. And the percentage should be, I wouldn't use anything less than 60-something percent.
Okay.
I think would be the most likely. I guess anything is better than nothing, honestly. Right. But that's what the official recommendations are if you're going to use it for that.
If you're going to go out and buy it specifically for that reason, then you might as well make sure you get the right kind of this time, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, excellent. While you have the internet, use it. You just go online and find the right stuff.
So it sounds like the abdominal injuries are kind of a grim situation. It's going to be difficult to not only diagnose what's going on, but difficult to fix what's going on.
It is one of the dilemmas that the medic is going to have to face, and I just want to say that I have so much respect for the person in the family that is going to take up the flag and bear the burden of being responsible for their people in times of trouble. I just it is not going to be an easy thing. I think things that seem simple to deal with now are going to be, life or death things in a what hits the fan setting, and all I can say is that I salute you. It's a tough job. Gain knowledge, gain training, and if you do, you will save lives. You may not save every life, but you will. I have no doubt you will save lives.
Okay.
Alrighty. Well, that about wraps it up. I think we got some great direction to go with at least being able to assess what's going on and trying to do the best we can with some horrible situations. So why don't you go ahead and remind the audience where they can find you at, and we'll wrap it up there.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. You can find us at doomandbloom.net is our main website. We have over 1,000 articles, podcasts, and videos now on the website. Remember our book, The Survival Medicine Handbook, 3rd edition. It's called The Essential Guide for When Medical Help is Not on the Way. And you'll find that on Amazon. If you want an autographed copy, we have them on the website. I think Amy has a deal for DVDs and books at a discount. So it's something that if you are going to be, it's in a mindset that makes sense for people that are concerned about apocalyptic type events. So it might be something you like. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, Dr. Bones Nurse Amy. Our Twitter is at Prepper Show, and our Facebook page is Survival Medicine, Dr. Bones Nurse Amy.
Definitely a book that you are going to need to have in your home, and you got to have these trained individuals. It's not an area we can just overlook.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, as I always do. Just such an honor to have you on the show.
And it's my honor to be on it. Thank you so much for having me.
Alrighty, Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show. Looks like the abdominal injury is not one that you really want to have, and, I've been playing a lot of airsoft and stuff lately, and I'm telling you, the best idea, everybody who thinks they're going to go gangbusters and get out their firearms and everything, you are just not thinking logically, because these little minor injuries, like you get shot just, anywhere, and you are going to be in big trouble. So I would advise that you learn how to hide and survive without being in fights, because, any little injury you sustain could be the deal breaker. But thank you so much, Joe, for your time. I really appreciate all the time you take for my show, coming on and giving us all this great medical advice. Can't wait to see you down in Texas at the Self-Reliance Expo, March 23rd and 24th. It's going to be a blast. We are getting everything together, and I tell you, I'm just so excited. I'm going to have my son Fletcher with me, and we're just going to be having a good time, and talking survival is absolutely what I love to do. I also want to remind you that over at forwardobserver.com, you'll get a 10% discount if you use my name, Sara. And Mike is doing some great work over at Forward Observer. I actually absolutely love his podcast. Keeps you all up to speed on news that you're not going to get anywhere else. The audiobook giveaway is now in full swing. So many ways you can enter that contest. Go over there and get her done, because I've got a bunch of those codes to give away, and I just want to start doing it. I'm excited to just start handing them out. So head on over to YouTube, to my website, to Facebook, subscribe. I'm going to pick up all those subscribers into the contest. And then anybody who comments on the Facebook post or on my blog will also get entered into that contest. And, thank you so much for your guys' support. You are really what makes the Changing Earth podcast go round, and I'm looking forward to a whole bunch of great content for you in the future. Just great ideas popping up, and just tons of content that we can keep rolling with, and just love to have your guys' support. So thank you so much. Until next time, remember, dream, survive, thrive.
Thank you for joining Sara for this episode of the Changing Earth podcast. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Day After Disaster, Without Land, The Walls of Freedom, and Battle for the South at www.author.sarafhathaway.com. If you love Sara's books and this podcast, please head over to Amazon or iTunes and let everyone know by leaving a review.